Bloomberg News is reporting U.S. President Donald Trump is privately considering exiting the North American Free Trade Pact. This comes after U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer said the administration would hold separate talks with Mexico and Canada. Here to talk about how the review in July might proceed is Lawrence Herman, an international trade lawyer at Herman and Associates. Lawrence, thank you very much for joining us.
You're welcome.
I mean, this isn't something he has mused about this before. Is it realistic?
I don't know whether it's realistic. I think the message is that they are looking at various options. I think from day one, it was thought that there would be difficult negotiations with the Americans. I think the possibility of withdrawal completely from the USMCA is pretty remote, but it is something that is obviously on the radar screen. And it was just a muse or a wondering by Mr. Trump if that might be an option. I think the more important thing, quite frankly, is the subsequent report that Jamieson Greer, the USTR, said the U.S. is considering separate deals with Canada and Mexico. And I don't think that should come as a surprise, although Canada has said that it would like to have the agreement continued as a three-party agreement, but the possibility of the Americans negotiating separately with Canada and the U.S., I think, was envisaged from the very start. When I say from the very start, when we began looking at the process of the USMCA coming under review.
Now, would that work? Would they be able to keep the three of them together if they're negotiating individually?
Well, that's a good question. It wouldn't be easy, but I think it could be done. Look, there are a lot of provisions in the USMCA that could be used in a bilateral agreement with Canada, as well as a separate bilateral agreement with Mexico. So I don't think mechanically it's going to be difficult to do that. But the point is, we will have an aggressive partner on the other side, whether it's a three-party negotiation or bilateral between Canada and Mexico, and we can expect very, very tough negotiations. And I think Canada has to be prepared to say, you know, these are red lines, and there are certain things that Canada cannot accept. It will mean that the negotiations, come on, they're going to be difficult, acrimonious, and at the end of the day, Canada is going to have to decide how much longer it can stay at the table if the other side is just unwilling to reach a kind of mutually satisfactory arrangement. Now, that's the big question.
Now, with you saying if it broke down to one-on-ones and these red lines and standing firm, does Canada have enough to stand to take a stand on things? Or do we hold any cards?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, the American industries across the board are dependent upon free trade and fair trade with Canada. I think there are a lot of interests in the States. You've already heard a lot of the pushback from what Trump has been saying from U.S. state interests, and there are a lot of major companies in the United States that have been saying trade with Canada is vital for their future. So there are a lot of things at play here, and a lot of American interests are going to be impacted if the free trade flows between the two countries don't continue. And you saw that when Trump threatened to stop the opening of the Gordie Howe Bridge. You heard the response from interests in Michigan, particularly the governor of Michigan, who said this is a non-starter. We depend highly on the flow of goods from Canada.
Now, we're going to do a what if here. What if CUSMA falls apart and we don't have any agreement with the U.S.? Would this free up Canada to be able to look to other markets easier than what we're trying to do now because we kind of have this sitting over here on the side? Would that open up more opportunities or no?
I think the opportunities are there now. And in fact, I think this government has been looking at those opportunities to diversify our relationships on trade and commercial matters. In fact, when you think about it, for decades, Canada has been regrettably wedded to the U.S. market, it is always a bad business practice to be so dependent on one customer, because that customer can turn ornery, as this customer, the U.S., has done. So I think that Canada has opportunities in other markets, but there are so many things that tie Canada and the U.S. together that I cannot see things going forward without some kind of agreement. It might not be a three-way agreement. It could be a bilateral agreement, as we mentioned before, that could incorporate a lot of the provisions on origin, on facilitating transboundary movement of goods, on services, on cybersecurity, digital trade, that are in the USMCA, and they could be applied or incorporated into a bilateral agreement. That could be done. Technically, it is not unfeasible.
Okay, and what about if we do end up doing one-on-one negotiations? Is there enough for us to negotiate with Mexico as some kind of an agreement between the two countries?
Yes, we could do that. And, the thing to remember is that we have a trade agreement with Mexico outside of the USMCA. Mexico is part of the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. So if the USMCA fell apart, let's say, or we did not have a separate agreement with Mexico, there is that multilateral agreement or the regional agreement. Mexico is party to the CPTPP, and so there would be an ongoing arrangement between Canada and Mexico. It would be better to have a straight bilateral agreement if the whole trilateral USMCA falls apart. But let's wait and see what happens. In the meantime, for Canada, the priority is to ensure that we get out from this volatile, uncertain, unstable relationship and somehow, over the next few months, put together a reasonably consistent and stable framework for conducting business. I mean, that's really what's at issue. We want to have stability in the business relationship, which doesn't exist now.
I hate to cut you off there, Lawrence, but we have to wrap it up. But thank you very much for joining us today.
You're welcome.
Lawrence Herman is an international trade lawyer at Herman and Associates.